I'm Guðmundur Kristjánsson. I'm the creative director and co-founder of 1939 Games. So KARDS, it has a bit of a long backstory. I mean, I think it all started with these little plastic soldiers. You know, when I was a kid, I used to have hundreds and thousands of these little guys. And they played out epic battles, of course. Me and my friends and cousins were playing with plastic, you know, these model kits and things like that. And so at a very early age I got very interested in World War II through that initially, but then also through board games and just comics and things like that. I was always really fascinated about World War II, even if it's not the finest hour of human history. There's a lot of there's something so fascinating about the scale of the struggle and all the technology and you know the different strategies of the different nations and all that. It just speaks to me in some way. So I started playing card games when I was pretty old. I was probably around 21 or something like that. When a friend of mine showed me Magic the Gathering for the first time. I thought I was a really cool guy at the time, and was mostly just partying with my friends and drinking a bit. And I thought this looked really nerdy to begin with, but then I completely got sucked into it. We were playing a lot of Magic, and of course I spent all my little money I had at the time on buying booster packs. But I really loved Magic from the get-go. How really simple the kind of core mechanics of Magic are, how easy it is to learn. And another thing also which I really like, the combination of artwork and the game mechanics, how it kind of fuels your imagination, the pictures on the cards, even if it's just like in our game, it's basically a really simple numbers game, if you will. But with the context and the artwork and all that stuff and the visual effects, then it inspires your imagination. It becomes something much more, much like when I was playing with these little plastic soldiers when I was a kid. They were, of course, not plastic anymore when you have set up a giant battle and you are playing around with them. It's all about the imagination. So the inspiration behind KARDS definitely comes from a lifelong interest in World War II, first and foremost, but also in card games and board games and strategy games. The strategy and board games I played, specifically the war games, were like Panzer Blitz and Panzer Leader. There were hexagon games with tons of counters all over the map. Flat Top was one that me and a cousin of mine played a lot, which is a aircraft carrier, also counter hexagon game. But then also played tons of Axis and Allies and Risk, of course, which is a bit the mother of all grand scale strategy games. So Axis and Allies is a fantastic strategy game, really grand scale strategy game, pretty simple and easy to get into. So I played probably thousands of hours with my friends of Axis and Allies. So basically you're playing the 5 major powers of World War II. The war starts at a certain period in the war, the beginning of the war, and then you can try to alter history by moving your military units around the board, the world map. So it's actually a pretty historically accurate game, but what me and some friends of mine did very early on, we started modding Axis and Allies, and I think we actually played a lot more the modded versions, and they were not as historically accurate. There we were kind of trying to get the replay value out of the game by keeping some of the core mechanics, but completely changing the starting positions, and everyone was playing against each other, so the traditional lines of Axis and Allies were not really there anymore. And then there was a lot of strategy and alliances were made and backstabbing and things like that. Yeah, maybe modding this game was probably one of the first kind of attempts to dabble a little bit with game design. It started kind of with I was working at a gaming studio in Iceland called CCP at the time, the makers of EVE Online, and by far the biggest gaming company in Iceland. I had not been playing card games for 10 or 15 years at the time, but some co-workers, we were playing Magic at lunchtime, and so I started dabbling around with Magic a little bit. Then I just thought to myself, there must be a World War II card game out there, and I just started looking for it, started browsing online, and didn't really find anything. It didn't seem like anyone had made a serious attempt of making a World War II collectible card game, which I think was strange, because I think immediately, when I think of it, it's a match made in heaven. So that was where the idea came from first, and then it was pretty clear to me that I wanted somehow to take the essence of a traditional collectible card game, like Magic and those types of games, but fuse it with elements from these strategy and war games and board games that I've been playing since I was a kid and also really loved. Yeah, so there are some core principles that are inherited from the tabletop games. We knew we wanted to include some core war elements like movement, range, different behavior of different military unit types, and maybe some of the logistics of warfare. So those are the main innovations that we bring to the card game. They are represented mainly around the concept of the front line, which is a line in the middle of the board where you need to move your ground units to be able to attack the enemy. I think we kind of nailed those core principles pretty well there. In regards to the logistics, we also added a feature called operation cost. So not only do you have to pay resources to play out your units and give your orders and things like that, but you also have to use your resources to operate them. So to attack and move with your units, you have to pay some resources for that as well. And that is an attempt to reflect the logistics of, you have to supply your armies and reinforce them and all that, which is a big part of warfare. So of course, originally it was much more complicated. In our original designs, you had more lines, many more types of units and all kinds of special rules, 3 or 4 different types of resources. So we've kind of simplified the game a lot since then and just tried to keep it to the bare minimum where you get these kind of elements while the game is still a card game and it hasn't turned into a full-blown, complicated board game. Well, of course, it's the only card game out there that is not set in a fantasy or sci-fi setting, at least if you're looking at the bigger games. It offers you a completely different kind of stimulation to your imagination. As for the context of World War II, as opposed to elves and trolls and all this typical fantasy setting in card games, I think it is twofold. Maybe for me, maybe I was a little bit tired of the fantasy setting because it has been used so much in the context of card games especially. And we wanted to bring something else to the table, but it's also, like I've explained before, I've always had this deep passion for World War II. So I think that's a narrative that we are, I'm at least much better suited to kind of bring that world to life than a game in a fantasy setting. We try to, be historically accurate as we can. We've always said that, the fun of playing the game comes before anything else, and if we have to, bend historical accuracy a little bit for that, then we definitely always do that. As mentioned before, I was obsessed when I was a kid with these tiny little plastic soldiers and the plastic models from Matchbox and Airfix. So it was really interesting for us when we started thinking about the artwork for KARDS. We actually just started to contact some of these artists who did the box art of the model kits and things like that back in the 80s. So some of these artists are, really old today, but it was really a bit of a dream come true when some of them that are absolute legends in that field agreed to take part in this project with us. When designing cards, we knew from the start that we wanted to capture the feeling of sitting at an actual table playing cards. You should feel like you're playing cards against your opponent. So there's just something cozy, so to speak. Sitting at the table, playing cards against someone, it's just a nice feeling. I think people kind of identify with that. And since it is a card game, I think the most natural way of designing it is to try to make it feel like you're actually playing cards. Why would you have a card game that then feels like, a computer game? We have been focusing quite a lot on having the cards move a little bit like they would in an actual, if you're playing cards, and behaving in the hand, as they would. People should get this kind of nice feeling that they're actually sitting at the table playing a card game with someone else, because that's just, people like that. And for example, for me, it's like if you compare it to sitting at the table and playing chess with a friend, or playing chess online, it's a completely different feeling. And we wanted to try to be more on this kind of intimate playing cards, trying to capture that somehow.